Snow fell silently over Manhattan, but inside the Calloway mansion, no one was celebrating Christmas anymore. The billionaire who owned it had everything money could buy except a son who hadn't spoken a single word since his mother died. That same night, just a few blocks away, a homeless black woman found something that could change her life forever or reveal who she truly was. Naomi Brooks sat curled beneath the flickering light of a subway entrance, her thin coat no match for the biting December cold. Around her, the city shimmered with holiday magic storefronts, glowing gold, strangers laughing over hot cocoa, carolers singing about joy and miracles. But for Naomi, Christmas had become just another reminder of everything she had lost. Once, she had dreamed of becoming a teacher. Once, she had believed in warmth, in family, in second chances. But life had stripped those dreams away piece by piece. First her childhood in foster care, then the long years caring for a dying mother, and finally the crushing weight of medical bills that left her with nothing but a backpack and a name no one remembered. That night, hunger gnawed at her stomach, sharp and relentless. The shelter she had been staying in was already full. She had nowhere else to go. And then she saw it. A black leather wallet lay half hidden near the curb, untouched by the passing crowd. Naomi hesitated before picking it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Cash. Crisp bills, neatly stacked. Enough to eat. Enough to sleep somewhere warm. Enough to start over. Her breath caught. For a moment, the world around her disappeared. The cold, the noise, the loneliness, all replaced by a single, dangerous thought. What if this is my way out? But then she saw the ID card tucked inside. Ethan Calloway. The name meant something. Everyone in New York knew it. Billionaire. Hotel Empire. Untouchable. Naomi stared at the address printed beneath his name. A place she had only ever seen from the outside gates, guards, a life that existed on the other side of glass and steel. Her grip tightened around the wallet. She could walk away. No one had seen her. No one would ever know. The wind howled down the street, carrying with it the distant sound of Christmas bells. Naomi closed her eyes. Then, slowly, she stood. Hours later, with frozen fingers and blistered feet, she found herself standing in front of the towering iron gates of the Calloway estate. The mansion beyond glowed with white lights and decorated trees. Beautiful, distant, untouchable. She swallowed hard, clutching the wallet against her chest. From somewhere above, behind a tall window framed in gold light, a small figure stood watching her. A boy, and for reasons she couldn't explain, he didn't look away. The gates did not open immediately. Naomi stood outside in the cold while the intercom crackled with suspicion, her breath fogging the air, her gloved fingers tightening around the wallet. Somewhere behind those iron bars was a man who could replace everything she had found without blinking. Somewhere behind those bars was also a child whose eyes had met hers through a second-story window with a stillness that unsettled her. A security guard finally stepped out, his expression cautious. He looked at Naomi, then at the wallet in her hands, and something in his posture changed. He led her through the gate without warmth, but without cruelty either, as though he had been trained to expect the worst from desperate people. The mansion was all polished stone, wreaths, candlelight, and silence. Not the warm kind of silence, Naomi noticed. Not the kind that came from peace. This was the heavy silence of a place where grief had settled into the walls and no one dared disturb it. Ethan Calloway was waiting in the foyer. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, severe in a charcoal sweater and dark trousers, the kind of man who looked expensive even in mourning. His face was handsome in the restrained, cold way wealth often sharpened people. But what struck Naomi most was not his appearance. It was the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like a man who had not truly slept in a very long time. "You found this?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Naomi nodded and handed him the wallet. "Near 57th and Lexington. I thought you should have it back." He opened it immediately, glancing at the cash, the cards, the folded papers inside. Nothing was missing. For one brief second, something flickered across his face. Not relief exactly. More like disbelief. "You didn't take anything," he said. Naomi almost laughed at how strange that sounded, as if honesty itself had become an unusual luxury. No. His gaze lifted to her again, this time more carefully. He saw the frayed cuffs of her coat, the wet hem of her jeans, the exhaustion she had tried and failed to hide. She could almost feel him piecing together the shape of her life from the evidence on her body. "You walked here in this weather?" "I took the subway as far as I could." She lowered her eyes. "Then I walked." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." Naomi hesitated. Rich men like Ethan Calloway did not invite women like her inside unless they wanted something or pitied them. She wasn't sure which would feel worse, but the warmth spilling from the house brushed against her skin like mercy, and her body betrayed her before pride could intervene. She stepped inside. As a housekeeper quietly took her coat, Naomi's gaze drifted toward the staircase. The little boy was there again. He stood barefoot in navy pajamas, one small hand gripping the banister, his pale face framed by soft golden light from the Christmas garlands twined along the rail. He could not have been older than 7. He was beautiful in the fragile way some children became, after too much sadness, too quiet, too watchful, as though childhood had left him unfinished. "Oliver," Ethan said, not unkindly, "go back upstairs." The boy didn't move. His large gray eyes stayed fixed on Naomi. There was no fear in them, no curiosity, either. Only something deeper. Something wounded and strangely familiar, as if he recognized loneliness when he saw it. Then, without a word, Oliver turned and disappeared into the hallway. Naomi looked back at Ethan. Does he always do that? Ethan's jaw tightened. He doesn't do much of anything anymore. There was no self-pity in the way he said it. Only fatigue. The kind of fatigue that came from carrying sorrow so long it began to feel like identity. He led her into a sitting room, where a fire burned low beneath a marble mantel. Stockings still hung there, untouched. A Christmas tree stood in the corner. Tall and beautifully decorated, but somehow wrong, as though someone had dressed it because tradition demanded it, not because joy remained. Naomi wrapped her hands around the mug of tea the housekeeper brought her, letting the heat sting her numb fingers. Ethan stood by the fireplace, one hand resting against the mantel. "My wife died 2 Decembers ago," he said at last, his voice as flat as winter glass. "Car accident on her way home from a children's hospital fundraiser." Naomi looked up. "She loved Christmas," he continued. "The music, the lights, the chaos, all of it. She used to turn this house into something ridiculous every December. Gingerbread stations, carolers, pajamas for the staff. She believed holiday magic could fix almost anything." His mouth tightened around the final words. "But after she died," he said quietly, "my son stopped speaking." Naomi's fingers tightened around the tea. "He was in the car?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded once. And in that single motion, Naomi suddenly understood everything. The silence in the house, the unfinished warmth, the little boy's hollow eyes, the man standing in front of her like someone who had survived the same fire as his son, but not come out whole. Naomi lowered her gaze, because she understood too much of that kind of brokenness. She had learned early that grief did not always arrive like screaming. Sometimes it arrived like numbness, like unpaid bills, like hospital chairs and fluorescent lights, like being too tired to cry because survival kept demanding one more day from you. Her own losses had not been dressed in designer grief, but pain had a way of making strangers equal. For the first time that night, Ethan's voice softened. "And you?" he asked. "Who waits for you to come home tonight?" Naomi stared into the tea for a moment before answering. "No one," she said. The fire crackled softly between them. And somewhere upstairs, in a house dressed for Christmas but still grieving the dead, a little boy who hadn't spoken in 2 years was standing just beyond a half-closed door, listening to every word. Naomi did not expect to stay. She expected a thank you, perhaps a polite dismissal, maybe even a quiet envelope pressed into her hand as compensation for her honesty. That was how the world usually worked. Brief kindness, carefully contained, never allowed to linger long enough to become uncomfortable. But Ethan Calloway did not dismiss her. Instead, He watched her as she finished the tea, his expression unreadable, as though he were trying to solve a problem he had not encountered before. "You said you have nowhere to go tonight," he said finally. Naomi hesitated. "That's not your concern. Everything that happens under my roof is my concern," he replied evenly. There was no arrogance in the statement, only certainty. He glanced toward the window, where snow continued to fall in soft, relentless silence. Then he made a decision. "You can stay," he said, "just for the night." Naomi opened her mouth to refuse pride, rising instinctively, but her body betrayed her again. She was exhausted. Cold had settled deep into her bones, and even the warmth of the house had not fully chased it away. "One night," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once, as though sealing an agreement neither of them fully understood. A guest room was prepared quickly. Clean sheets, warm lighting, a view of the city softened by snowfall. Naomi stood in the doorway for a moment, before stepping inside, unsure how to exist in a space so far removed from the life she had been living. She washed her hands in a marble sink, watching the dirt swirl away, and for a brief, fragile moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong somewhere like this. But she knew better. Places like this did not keep people like her. The next morning, Naomi woke to quiet. No shouting, no sirens, no footsteps rushing past her on cold concrete. Just stillness. Gentle, undisturbed. She dressed in the spare clothes the housekeeper had left for her simple, but soft, and stepped into the hallway. The house was already awake, though it didn't feel alive. Staff moved quietly, efficiently, decorations gleamed. A Christmas playlist drifted faintly from hidden speakers. Everything was perfect, and yet, something was missing. She found Oliver in the living room. He sat on the floor beside the towering Christmas tree, a box of ornaments open in front of him. His small hands moved slowly, carefully, as he picked one up, a delicate glass snowflake, and placed it on the lower branches. Not playing, not enjoying, just performing the motion. Naomi stood at the doorway, unsure whether to approach. "Hi," she said softly. Oliver froze. For a moment, Naomi thought he might run. Instead, he turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers again. The same quiet intensity, the same unspoken weight. She crouched down slowly, keeping her movements gentle, non-threatening. "That one's nice," she said, nodding toward the ornament he had just placed. "My mom used to love snowflakes. Said they were the only thing in the world that were perfect because they never tried to be." Oliver blinked. It was a small reaction. Almost nothing. But Naomi saw it. She smiled faintly. She used to say, if you looked closely enough, every snowflake looked like it had a story. The boy's fingers tightened around the edge of the box. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. And somehow, that felt like something. Ethan watched from the hallway. He had come downstairs expecting to find his son alone, lost in the same quiet rituals he had performed every morning since his mother died. The same careful placement of ornaments. The same empty routine. But instead, he found Naomi sitting on the floor a few feet away, speaking softly, as if she understood something no one else had been able to reach. Oliver wasn't talking, but he was listening. Ethan's chest tightened. It had been nearly 2 years since anyone outside of doctors and therapists had been allowed this close without triggering silence or retreat. And yet, this woman, this stranger who had walked into his life carrying nothing but a lost wallet, had somehow crossed a line no one else could even see. "Oliver," Ethan said gently. The boy's shoulders stiffened. The moment broke. Oliver stood abruptly and walked past Naomi without a word, disappearing down the hallway. Naomi lowered her gaze, a flicker of disappointment passing through her expression. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. She shook her head. "Don't be." He stayed longer than he wanted to. "That matters." Ethan studied her. "You understand him," he said quietly. Naomi hesitated. "I understand what it feels like when the world expects you to keep moving, even when something inside you has stopped." Ethan didn't respond, because there was nothing to argue with in that. Later that afternoon, as snow continued to fall outside and the city prepared itself for Christmas Eve, Ethan made another decision. "One night isn't enough," he said, standing across from Naomi in the study. She frowned slightly. For what? For him, Ethan replied. And maybe for this house. Naomi stiffened. I'm not looking for a job. I'm not offering you charity, he said calmly. I'm offering you time. She didn't answer. Ethan stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Stay until Christmas, he said. Help me get through the next 2 days. Help him. Naomi looked toward the window, where snow drifted endlessly against the glass. 2 days. That was all. She told herself it meant nothing. All right, she said at last. Ethan nodded once, but neither of them noticed the small figure standing just beyond the doorway, hidden in shadow, watching, waiting, and for the first time in a very long time, hoping. Christmas Eve arrived, wrapped in silver light and false perfection. Outside, the Calloway mansion looked like something torn from a luxury holiday magazine. White lights draped across the hedges, velvet bows on every wreath, fresh snow dusting the stone steps like powdered sugar. A choir was scheduled to arrive that evening. A private chef was preparing dinner. A photographer had been booked for a family Christmas portrait. Ethan's publicist insisted would reassure investors that he was finally settling back into normal life. Inside, however, nothing was normal. Something fragile had begun to shift in the house since Naomi arrived. Oliver had not spoken, but he had started doing things no one had seen him do in months. He sat in the kitchen while Naomi baked gingerbread and watched her shape stars and tiny Christmas trees from dough. He let her place a wool scarf around his neck when she noticed he was cold. He even handed her a broken ornament from a box in the attic and waited quietly while she fixed it with trembling patience and a little gold ribbon. They were tiny things, but grief often cracked open through tiny things. Ethan noticed all of it. He noticed the way Oliver followed Naomi with his eyes, the way his son sat closer when she read aloud from an old Christmas storybook she had found in the library, the way the house itself seemed less frozen when her voice moved through it. And that was exactly what frightened him, because hope, to a man who had already buried too much, could feel dangerously close to betrayal. That afternoon, Ethan's sister, Victoria, arrived unannounced. She swept into the house in a cream wool coat and diamond earrings, carrying the sharp perfume of old money and well-practiced judgment. Victoria had always considered herself the keeper of Calloway dignity since Ethan's wife died. She handled board whispers, family image, and every silent crisis with polished cruelty disguised as concern. The moment she saw Naomi helping Oliver place ribbon on the staircase garland, her expression changed. "Who is she?" Victoria asked, though her tone made it clear she had already decided. Naomi stepped back instinctively. She returned my wallet," Ethan said evenly. "She's staying through Christmas." Victoria's gaze slid over Naomi slowly, assessing every visible sign of where she came from and deciding, in less than a second, what that must mean. "How generous of you," she said. Naomi knew that kind of tone. It was the tone people used when they wanted to remind you that kindness was always conditional. Later, during lunch, Victoria made no effort to hide her disapproval. "These things never stay simple," she murmured to Ethan in the dining room, though not quietly enough. "A vulnerable billionaire, a lonely child, a beautiful woman with nowhere to go. You know exactly how this looks." Naomi lowered her eyes to her plate. Ethan's voice hardened. "She's helping Oliver." Victoria gave a soft laugh. "Or helping herself." The words landed harder than Naomi wanted to admit, because the cruelest accusations were often the ones already whispered by your own fear. She excused herself before dessert. By evening, things got worse. A photo appeared online. No one knew exactly who had taken it. Perhaps a paparazzo tipped off by staff movement. Perhaps one of the catering assistants eager to sell a story. But within an hour, entertainment blogs had begun circulating an image of Naomi stepping out of Ethan's car that morning after he had taken her to buy a proper coat and boots for the snow. The headline was vicious in its sweetness. "Who is Ethan Calloway's mystery woman this Christmas?" Then another. "From homeless to heiress? Billionaire's new nanny raises questions." By 6 o'clock, Ethan's phone was vibrating nonstop. Publicist, board members, investors, Reporters. Naomi found him in the study, staring at the headlines with a face that had gone completely still. "I'm sorry," she said softly from the doorway. Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. "You didn't call them?" The question was quiet, but it cut. Naomi froze. "No," she said, after a beat. "I would never do that." Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhausted, cornered, angry at too many things to separate them clearly. "I know how this works," he said. "People get close to men like me for less." Naomi stared at him, as if he had struck her. The room went silent. For a moment, Ethan looked as though he wanted to take the words back. But grief and pride had made him a man who often realized the truth too late. Naomi straightened slowly. "I returned your wallet when I had every reason not to," she said, her voice low and steady. "I asked you for nothing. Not your money. Not your pity. Not your house." Ethan said nothing, and somehow, that was worse. Naomi nodded once, a tiny movement full of hurt, too old to dramatize. "Then I think I should go." Upstairs, Oliver stood at the top of the staircase, unseen, watching her walk away, and for the first time since Naomi had entered the house, something in his small face broke with unmistakable fear. Naomi packed quickly. People who had lost everything before learned not to linger when a door began to close. She folded the borrowed sweater the housekeeper had given her, placed it neatly on the edge of the guest bed, and zipped her backpack with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew how to leave without leaving a mess behind. Outside the tall windows, Christmas Eve had deepened into a blue-white storm. Snow spun in wild, luminous circles under the estate lights. Somewhere downstairs, staff were still preparing for the evening gala. Ethan had no doubt been pressured into hosting. Silver trays, champagne flutes, polished smiles. The kind of holiday performance wealthy families staged when no one wanted to discuss what was broken. Naomi paused only once before walking out. On the bedside table sat a small paper gift bag she had made that afternoon for Oliver. Inside was the repaired glass snowflake ornament, wrapped carefully in tissue, and a handwritten note on thick cream stationery she had found in the desk drawer. "For when Christmas feels heavy, some broken things are still beautiful." Naomi. She left it there and shouldered her backpack. When she opened the bedroom door, Oliver was standing in the hallway. He had probably been there for several minutes, maybe longer. His small hands hung stiffly at his sides, and his eyes, those solemn gray eyes that looked too much like his father's and too much like grief, moved from Naomi's backpack to her face. She swallowed. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. He didn't move. Naomi crouched down so she was closer to his height. "I need to go now." Nothing. But his breathing changed. Faster. Shallower. She knew that look. Panic in children didn't always come as screaming. Sometimes it arrived like stillness pulled too tight, like a thread one breath away from snapping. "I'm not leaving because of you," she said softly. "Do you hear me? None of this is your fault." Oliver's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Naomi wanted, very suddenly and very painfully, to pull him into her arms. But she also knew that love, especially for wounded children, had to be offered before it was taken. So she simply reached out and touched the sleeve of his pajama top for the briefest second. "Merry Christmas, Ollie." Then she stood and walked away. He didn't follow. That was the cruelest part. He just stood there, watching the only gentle thing that had entered his world in 2 years disappear down a long, decorated hallway. Downstairs, Ethan was alone in the study when the housekeeper, Mrs. Delgado, entered without knocking. That alone told him something was wrong. "She's leaving," Mrs. Delgado said quietly. Ethan looked up sharply. "What?" "She left the room clean, folded the clothes, didn't take a thing." Mrs. Delgado's face, usually composed, held a quiet accusation. "She even left the envelope." "What envelope?" "The one your assistant placed in her room this afternoon. Emergency cash, $5,000. Ethan's expression changed. He rose at once and went upstairs. The envelope was exactly where Mrs. Delgado said it would be, untouched on the desk beneath the lamp. Beside it sat the gift bag Naomi had left for Oliver. Ethan stared at both for a long moment. Then he opened the card. Some broken things are still beautiful. Something in his chest shifted small, but unmistakable. Shame, perhaps. Or the first crack in a wall he had mistaken for strength. He turned sharply. "Where's Oliver?" Mrs. Delgado frowned. "I thought he was with you." Ethan's blood went cold. They searched the house first. Oliver's room. The library. The breakfast room. The music room his mother used to fill with Christmas records. The glass conservatory at the back of the house. Nothing. Then one of the guards came in from the side entrance, snow dusting his coat. "Sir," he said, too quickly. "The West Gate alarm was triggered 3 minutes ago." Ethan didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already running. Naomi had only made it halfway down the long road beyond the Calloway estate when she heard shouting behind her. The wind nearly swallowed the sound, but not quite. Then she heard Ethan's voice raw, stripped of all control. "Oliver." She turned instantly. The road was nearly white now, the snowfall thicker, the world reduced to shadows and motion and ice-blue light. For one terrifying second, she saw nothing. Then she saw him, a small dark figure, moving clumsily through the storm beyond the hedges, too far from the house, too underdressed, too alone. Naomi dropped her backpack and ran. She did not think. She did not hesitate. She simply moved with the fierce, instinctive urgency of a woman who had once stood between suffering and people she loved because no one else had. "Oliver," she called, her boots slipping on the icy path. The boy stumbled near the edge of a frozen decorative pond, hidden beneath fresh snow. His little body shook violently. Whether from cold or panic, Naomi couldn't tell. She reached him just as his knees buckled. "Oh, baby," she gasped, dropping to the snow and catching him before he hit the ground. He was freezing. His hands clutched at her coat with desperate, trembling force. And when she wrapped her arms around him, she felt how violently his heart was beating. "You're okay. I've got you. I've got you." Oliver buried his face into her shoulder like a child who had run out of ways to survive by himself. Naomi pulled off her scarf and wrapped it around his neck, then tucked him fully against her body, shielding his face from the wind. "Look at me," she whispered. "Ollie, look at me." He didn't. He just held on harder. Behind them, Ethan was running now too, his voice closer, breaking apart in the snow. But Oliver didn't reach for him. He stayed locked around Naomi like she was the last warm thing left in the world. Naomi rocked him gently, one hand cradling the back of his head the way mothers did without thinking. "It's okay," she whispered into his hair. "You don't have to be brave right now. You can just be little. I've got you." And then it happened. It was small, fragile, barely more than breath, but in the silent, glittering violence of that Christmas Eve snowstorm, it landed with the force of a miracle. "Mommy," Naomi froze. Ethan stopped dead several feet away. Oliver's fingers twisted tighter in Naomi's coat, his entire body trembling as tears finally broke free from somewhere deep and long buried. "Mommy, don't go." The world seemed to stop. Naomi felt her own eyes fill instantly. Not because he had called her by the wrong name, but because she understood what the child truly meant. Not "who are you?" but "please, don't leave me too." Ethan stood in the snow as if struck. For 2 years, doctors had told him not to force language. Therapists had told him healing could not be rushed. Family had told him time would do what love could not. And yet here, in the arms of a woman he had doubted, his son had just spoken his first words since the night his mother died. Not to him, to Naomi. The truth landed all at once, merciless and clear. She had never wanted his money, never wanted his name, never wanted anything from him at all. She had only done what broken. Loving people sometimes did for one another. She had seen a hurting child and stayed soft anyway. Ethan sank to his knees in the snow in front of them, all billionaire polish stripped away. "Oliver," he whispered, his voice breaking. The boy turned slightly but did not let go of Naomi. Ethan looked up at her then, truly looked at her, and whatever he saw there undid him completely. "I'm sorry," he said, the words ragged and unguarded. "God, Naomi, I'm so sorry." Naomi held Oliver tighter, her own tears mixing with the snow caught in her lashes. Behind them, The mansion glowed in the storm like a distant promise, and for the first time in 2 years, Christmas did not feel like the anniversary of a death. It felt like something impossible, and trembling had just been born. They went back inside slowly, as if no one wanted to move too quickly and frighten the miracle away. Mrs. Delgado met them at the door with blankets, tears shining openly in her eyes as she hurried Oliver toward the warmth of the sitting room. A doctor was called not because anyone believed something was terribly wrong, but because Ethan had spent too many years losing precious things to risk even the smallest uncertainty. Oliver was physically fine. Cold, shaken, exhausted, but fine. Emotionally, however, something had shifted. He would not let Naomi out of his sight, even after he was wrapped in a blanket and tucked into the deep corner of the sofa beside the fire. His hand remained locked around two of her fingers, as though he believed she might vanish if he loosened his grip even once. Naomi stayed beside him without complaint, the repaired glass snowflake ornament still waiting upstairs in its paper bag, forgotten now beneath the weight of something much more fragile and important. Ethan stood several feet away for a long time, watching them. There was no defense left in him anymore. No suspicion, no carefully managed distance. Only the terrible, humbling clarity of a man realizing he had mistaken gentleness for danger, because he had lived with pain too long to recognize safety when it finally appeared. Later, when Oliver had drifted into sleep with his cheek resting against Naomi's arm, Ethan quietly asked Mrs. Delgado to stay nearby. Then he led Naomi into the conservatory at the back of the house. Snow pressed softly against the glass walls. White lights reflected in the dark outside, making it look as though the night itself had become full of stars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan exhaled slowly and said the one thing pride had kept from him for far too long. "I was wrong." Naomi looked down, her hands folded in front of her. "I know grief makes people cruel sometimes," she said softly. "That doesn't make it hurt less." His jaw tightened. "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." He stepped closer, though still carefully, as if he understood now that trust was not something he could demand just because he regretted breaking it. "When my wife died," he said, "I thought if I stayed in control of everything, I could keep what was left from falling apart too. The house, the company, my son, my own mind." His voice roughened. "But I didn't keep anything together, Naomi. I just made this place colder." Naomi's eyes lifted to his. "And when you walked in," he continued, "Oliver started coming back to life. And instead of being grateful, I let fear convince me that something this good had to be false." The silence between them was not empty. It was honest. Then Ethan reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small folded envelope. Naomi's expression changed immediately. "If that's money," she said quietly, "I don't want it. It's not that." He handed it to her. Inside was a letter, not a contract, not a payout. A formal enrollment confirmation for a university program in early childhood and special needs education fully funded, beginning in January. Naomi stared at it, not breathing. "I had my assistant look into the programs you once applied to," Ethan said. "Mrs. Delgado told me she overheard you mention it when you were reading with Oliver. You said you used to want to teach children who felt invisible." Naomi looked up slowly, her eyes already bright with tears. "You remembered that?" "I should have remembered everything," he said. She read the paper again, her fingers trembling now. "It's too much." "No," Ethan replied gently. "It's not enough." He paused, then added with quiet sincerity, "You gave my son something no doctor, no therapist, no amount of money could buy back. I'm not trying to repay you. I'm trying to stop pretending your life should return to hardship just because mine happened to begin in comfort." Naomi's mouth trembled slightly. For years, she had survived on scraps of time, of money, of safety, of kindness. The hardest thing about long suffering was not always the suffering itself. Sometimes it was learning how to receive something good without immediately fearing it would be taken away. And this felt dangerously good. "I don't know what happens now," she admitted. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "For tonight," he said, "you stay." She almost laughed through the tears gathering in her eyes. "And after tonight?" she asked. He glanced back toward the house, toward the sleeping child wrapped in warmth and trust for the first time in years. "After tonight," he said quietly, "we figure out what a home is supposed to feel like." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had stepped through the gates carrying his lost wallet against her chest, she allowed herself to believe that maybe this story had not brought her here merely to test her honesty. Maybe it had brought her here to restore something all of them had lost. An hour later, the Christmas choir still came, but the formal dinner was canceled. The photographer was sent away. The curated perfection no longer mattered. Instead, just after midnight, Ethan, Naomi, and Oliver stood together in the softly lit living room, wearing mismatched sweaters and thick socks, placing the final ornament on the tree. Oliver was still quiet, but no longer absent. He leaned sleepily against Naomi's side while Ethan stood close enough to touch, no longer afraid of tenderness. Outside, snow continued to fall over Manhattan in patient, shining silence. Inside, the house was no longer just decorated for Christmas. For the first time in years, it actually felt like Christmas, and somewhere beneath the lights, the grief, and the miracle of a child's returning voice, something new began to take root between them. Not perfect, not simple, but real. A family, perhaps. Not built by blood alone, but by the rare and holy courage to stay.